Welcome back to Corpse Club, the official podcast of dailydead.com. I am one of your co-hosts, Bryan Christopher, and we are returning to Morningside, or somewhere vaguely in Oregon and or the Southwest. We're not really sure where we are at this point, but we are digging into our Phantasm retrospective with Phantasm IV Oblivion. And because of that, as you know, I am joined by my brother from the north, Mr. Scott Drebit. How are you doing, Scott?
I am doing very well, Bryan, and thank you for the intro. And honestly, I want to get our guest in here right away because this is truly a fellow fan, PH, capital PH, that I know I've known a long time through social media, and he's a super guy. So Bryan, get him in here so we can get going on our Phantasm talk.
Definitely. Okay, so we're talking to, if you're a fan of Don Coscarelli, then you probably appreciate Peter Hearn for his fellow indie movie creds with writer and director of the movie Scrawl and writer and producer of movies like Dead Air, Smile, and Blink. Peter, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very glad to have you. Scott was very adamant that you are a fellow fan, so we needed to get you on board, and he chose an interesting entry to get you on board with.
I think it's a good one.
And it's also interesting because we like to have our guests talk a little bit about kind of what their entry point to the Phantasm universe. But I actually happen to know because I was reading your look back on the Phantasm series that you did for Horror Cult Films. And I think you might be the only person whose entry point into the Phantasm series was James LeGros.
Yeah, quite possibly. I was a massive fan I guess it was in the early 90s, when he was doing like Living in Oblivion and Point Break and stuff like that. And as I did back then, I would go down the rabbit hole of every film that the actor of the moment that I was into had done, and one of them was Phantasm II, and I remember watching it, and obviously you've read this, but I remember watching it and going, it's all right, I guess, but yeah, whatever, and kind of didn't really think much more of it. I think I was a bit of a snob. Back then, bit of a kind of indie film snob, and I wasn't much of a horror fan, I must admit. Back in the 90s, I was in the 80s. Then for some reason in the 90s I wasn't, and then it kind of came back in the noughties. The noughties, I hate that. So James LeGros was kind of the entry point. And it wasn't until quite a few years later that I kind of delved into the others.
I think there's something to be said, too, for availability. And I think we've come across this already, Bryan, in the other guests that we've talked to. Mm-hmm. The entry point for a lot of people seems to be Phantasm II. And I think that, of course, has a lot to do with it being with Universal and distribution. And when the movie came and did what it did and was gone, it had a long shelf life on video. And that all has to do with Universal's distribution, right? So I think it's very interesting how we've seen, talking to a lot of people doing this series, how that can play such an important part in not only people's entry points, but I think just the ones that stick out to them.
Definitely. And, Peter, you're also definitely not the first person I've heard talk about the idea that it wasn't love at first sight when it comes to Phantasm. And I think that's even true to a degree for me. Like part 2 was probably my entry point as well, just because that was the one that was out when I was, a kid starting to watch horror movies, and I liked it fine, but it wasn't something where it was, these weren't movies where the first time I watched them, it was something that, kind of resonated down to my core the way that they do now. So it's interesting absolutely. to hear that kind of as a refrain of people saying, like, I didn't quite get it at first, and then I happened to see it in the right context, and I hit the right frequency.
Yeah, no, I think it took something, I guess, in my life to make me kind of sit down and watch from the start, because I remember I worked in Blockbuster, I worked in a cinema, and then I thought, I'll go and work in a video shop for a while. Hated it. I went back to the cinema, but I remember working in Blockbuster, and it would have been around probably, it probably would have been around the time that Oblivion came out, or maybe just before. And I remember seeing tons and tons of boxes of number 3 and number 2. Someone had put like a display up. And I, again, kind of going back to my snobbery, I kind of sniggered and went, are they really making a sequel? Did they really make a sequel to that? And it wasn't until I made, I was researching stuff to do Scrawl, that I sat down and watched the first Phantasm. So this is 2010 or 2011. Mm-hmm. So it's a long, long time after seeing Phantasm 2 that I kind of went back to it. And there was just something about the first one that just clicked, and it clicked at that point, and that's when I went, I've got to watch the others. But I kind of didn't. I watched the Phantasmagoria documentary first, which was on the UK Blu-rays that we had. DVDs that we had. And I kind of got it more through that initially than actually watching the films. Watching the talking heads, watching the love of it from Coscarelli and the others, and Michael Baldwin kind of being quite arsy about the whole thing. And it just, I kind of wanted, I kind of watched that, and I'd watched Phantasm at a similar time, and I just thought, I need to go back and watch all of these and see, why, Jake West made that documentary, why, he had gone to, Jake West being kind of another Brit filmmaker who I'd known of, and I knew that he'd done this documentary at the time. And I was like, what has made people fans of this rather, on the surface, a bit odd, franchise? On the surface,
I would say even below. I would say even below the surface, it's pretty odd.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I kind of just, I went through them, and kind of, fell in with it, fell in love with it. Fell in love with 2, which, I got more the second time round, and then 3, and then 4. 4 was one of those ones that everyone went, oh, 4's, 4's not good. And you're like, you're kind of bracing yourself for, 4's not good. And I actually, remember having the same kind of response to 4 that I have with the end of Rocky or the end of Terminator 2, where I kind of get a lump in my throat because I've kind of felt that I've gone on a journey. And, at the end of, Rocky, he doesn't, spoiler, alert for a 40-odd-year-old film. He doesn't win the fight, but it's not about that, and it's kind of a similar kind of thing with Oblivion. You're taken on a journey that was kind of made out of the necessity for them to just keep going and do what they could with what they had, and that kind of resonated with me, because that's kind of how I've approached all of my work. Making what you can with what you've got. Mm-hmm. So that's probably why that was a long-winded kind of thing, but that's probably why I'm the fan of the franchise.
But I think it really does come down to that first movie, getting in line with that first movie.
Yeah.
Again, no matter where you're coming in with the series, but when you get a hold of that first movie and when you go back and watch that first movie, as each of us has countless times, I'm sure, but it feels like a lesson plan for the whole series, not in terms, obviously, of plot, but I think in terms, it's a mission statement in terms of tone and intention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what the wonderful surprise is that as you're watching Oblivion and it unfolds, and then when you get to that rocky moment, as you say, Peter, you realize that it actually has completed the story in one of the most graceful end notes that I've seen, frankly, in any horror film or in any film for that matter. And that's why I love Oblivion, but that first film is crucial, I think, for anyone to, if you're gonna, the rest of the films will fall in line for you and make some semblance of sense, but you have to have that first film in your system.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and this goes to that idea of this being a series that isn't necessarily standalone installments like we've talked about with Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, those movies where it's a fairly straightforward concept in that you don't necessarily need to be on board with the rest of the movies or be familiar with them to get at least the gist of what's going on. Whereas with these, it's continuing a story that if you're not invested in what's happened in the previous ones, then you're probably not going to really care much about this one, and it's just going to confuse and irritate you. For me, in terms of kind of remembering my first time watching Part 4, I think it suffered from two things for me. The fact that I was 14 when it came out, and it was the first Phantasm movie that I had anticipated. So the other ones were, 2 was out when I was a kid, so I just kind of saw it. 3 was kind of the first one that I actively sought out when I saw it in the video store, went back and checked out 1 and started to really kind of get into the Phantasm universe. So 4 was the first one where I was waiting for this movie to come out. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the production history, because there were some other versions of this that were kind of in the works that didn't come to fruition that I think would have been like the Roger Avery script for Phantasm's End. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But because I wanted something that was going to be this kind of big grand finale and got something that was very much the opposite of that, I was definitely one of the people who, when it first came out, I was disappointed by it. And we'll talk, though, I think it's very much grown on me. I think it's still got there are some seams that show with it, but I have come more in line with Scott's thinking in that it's such a very kind of melancholy, and I think the way you put it was best, Scott, a graceful way of kind of closing it out. But at 14 years old, when you want some kind of like closure in this kind of grand finale, and you very much don't get that with Oblivion, that's kind of where I was having some trouble with it the first time I saw it.
Oh, I get that from your 14-year-old perspective. There was no closure. Mm-hmm. Of course, you watch it now, and you know it's beautiful. I was just watching it again last night, and a couple things struck me this time while watching it immediately. Was for what was it, $650,000 was the budget,
down from $2.5 million from Lord of the Dead.
Is that what 3 cost? Was 2.5? Is that what they had their budget? Okay. Anyway, as typically with Coscarelli, it's a beautiful looking movie. There's just some gorgeous shots in it, and the framing, and so there's that. So I think, you know, I was expecting him to clear that hurdle. No problem. Now that part wasn't in my mind. I think I was more concerned first viewing it with just how or where it was going to go coming off of 3. 3 had that such a great cliffhanger with finding out Mike's deeper connection with the tall man, and I just love the gold sphere eyes and all of that stuff. So I guess I was concerned that in a 90-minute space, where that was going to go, because, and again, it's a film. This one unfolds at a different pace than the others as well, but it has different things in mind, and I think once Coscarelli had accepted and had this vision, he really leans into this one, and it almost comes across as, with the exception, I think, of certain moments in in Ravager and the original, this almost comes across, feels like the most personal.
I would agree with that.
Of the series. So that's another reason why it's will keep sticking with me.
And I do appreciate, and I think this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about the production history. So, we're coming off of 3 that came out, a few years before. 3 did fairly well on the direct-to-video market. We had kind of seen this really great road trip movie that took some of those elements from 2 in terms of that, some of the action and some of that, the road trip elements from 2. But, as we discussed, brought back some more of those surreal, funky, independent feeling elements from the first one to make something that was just, I love 3. 3 is a lot of fun. And so they're coming off that, the end of 3, you've got Rocky kind of driving off into the sunset, but you've got another cliffhanger, though, where poor Reggie is kind of, stuck up against the corner of the mausoleum with a bunch of spheres surrounding him. Once again, not looking great for him. And then young Tim, who was a new entry for part 3, gets pulled out into the window, and frankly, spoiler alert, is never heard from again in the rest of the series. We're coming off of yet another cliffhanger in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the horror landscape at the time. This comes out in 98, so Scream had come out. You kind of get the revitalization of the second wave slasher boom, kind of the more self-aware slasher movies. And I think Phantasm kind of has this odd man out feeling in terms of this series that is very much not trying to be overly clever. It's definitely doesn't have big names in it if you're not already a fan of the series. And so they're trying to come up with a way of I think at the time, bring this to a conclusion. And so one of the scripts that was put together was from Roger Avery, who you might know from doing the scripts for movies like Pulp Fiction with Quentin Tarantino. But if you look at the Phantasm's End treatment and script, this is something that's going to be pretty grand and pretty over the top. I think at one point Bruce Campbell was having conversations to maybe be a co-star in it, but they couldn't really get this was going to cost a budget, and one that they couldn't really get. So what wound up becoming Oblivion, my understanding, is something that was supposed to kind of be like a precursor or maybe an interim solution that Coscarelli was working on until they maybe could make Phantasm's End work. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it work. So, what we're getting here is, as we said, Lord of the Dead had a $2.5 million budget. We're looking at a $650,000 budget. So they're really, this is the first time they had less than $1 million since the first one. The interior set space that they had was in a warehouse. The space they had was 19 feet wide by 55 feet long. So in terms of interior sets, they could only do one at a time. So they were really hindered in terms of resources and what they were going to do. And that's kind of where Coscarelli got the inspiration that from the first movie they had, I think they had like 3 hours worth of a movie or something like that from the original Phantasm. And obviously they only used about an hour and a half of it. So there was a lot of footage on the cutting room floor. And Coscarelli got the idea to start incorporating some clips from those cut scenes. And he actually wrote a screenplay around that footage, which I know is another point of contention for some Phantasm fans. They almost look at it as a clip show for a movie that never actually happened. You're looking at recycled footage, and I think if you're just looking at this on paper, you could. One might make the argument that it's almost like a Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, or I think one of the Sleepaway Camps just kind of rehashed old footage. But I think this is very different because for me, Coscarelli does such a better job at taking that old footage, and it doesn't feel like throwaway material. It feels like something that he did a very good job at expanding kind of the inner workings of these characters and kind of their motivations and where they're coming from. So Peter, what are your thoughts on the decision to use the old footage?
If it didn't have that in it, I don't think I would feel as connected to the film as I do. The scenes kind of with, Reggie and Mike, the ice cream truck, especially the ending, but the earlier one as well. It's just one of those things where I think he was quite clever with what that he had that kind of vision to be able to go, well, I could use this, and then that could kind of lead into this part of the film. And some beautifully kind of composed like match cuts that go on with kind of like the tall man when he runs over the dog and presumably the kid as well. And he's kind of jutting out his chin, and then it cuts to kind of the adult Mike. That was kind of something that I picked up on yesterday when I rewatched it as well. I love the footage. It doesn't feel like a clip show to me. It's never felt like a clip show or even kind of, because you've not seen that footage before. And it kind of looks as fresh as the stuff that they shot to kind of go with it. It kind of almost feels like it was all shot at the same time. Obviously, you can't kind of age actors that quickly on set. But it does, I think, had it been, now where you've got, we're more used to digital filmmaking and stuff, I think that would have stood out a bit more like a sore thumb. But because they're shooting on film, the original footage is on film, it kind of feels, it feels like a match, made for what he had to do, what he felt he had to do. And having read one of the versions of the Avery script, I'm kind of glad that it wasn't made. I'm kind of glad that we went.
Can you talk a little bit about what were the elements? I'll admit I haven't read the Avery script. Where would it, in an alternate timeline, where does Phantasm go under Avery screenplay?
It just feels a lot bigger, and it feels a lot less Phantasm, which is weird from someone that is such a big Phantasm fan.
Yeah.
I really like Roger Avery's stuff. And I was, when I heard that he had written a script, I was like scouring the internet for it, trying to find it. And I did find it. And I was like really excited to read it. And I kind of came away going, okay. It's all right, I guess. I think, Scott, you mentioned it felt a little bit like Aliens, and it does, but not in a necessarily good way.
No, you had sent it to me, and I said it feels like, after having read it, it has a great ending. It's got a great ending, but what Phantasm does it? But it really does. It feels like, as Aliens is to Alien, one is an action movie and one's a horror movie. Phantasm's End would be an action movie.
Yeah.
With, as Peter said, not nearly enough Phantasm in it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. I'm kind of hopping onto the Ravager here, but Ravager seems to take quite a lot of what Avery was kind of hinting at. When I watched that, I was like, this feels a little bit like what in places, not all the way through, but in places it feels a little bit like what Avery was trying to do. And I didn't mind it. I didn't mind it in those small, because it felt, Ravager felt a little bit more simple, and it felt a bit more Phantasm.
A lot more Phantasm.
But it's interesting. I mean, with that one out of the way, with the Avery script out of the way, what Coscarelli and the rest of the guys did with Oblivion, it felt like the right conclusion to that series, even though obviously Ravager continues it, and Ravager almost kind of feels like the right end to the series until they make another one, and then that will feel like the right end to the series. It's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky to, I kind of had that bittersweet kind of feeling yesterday, going, this is really the last time we saw the tall man as the tall man, rather than someone in alien health, someone that could only kind of be there for a couple of scenes, as he is in Ravager. And again, kind of looking at the documentaries to the series, and them going, we could make another one. I'm like, but what would you do with that character? It's one of those series, and there are very, very few now where you could kind of go, you can't do anything, you can't make anything more with Phantasm. It's kind of, those are, those characters, even James Agro, his character turns up in one of the drafts. I don't think he turned up in the draft that we read, Scott, but I'm sure that there was a draft where he kind of, where the two Mikes met each other or saw each other, to kind of try and tie them together. but it's just one of those. Just talking about it now just makes me want to hang up and go and put it on again. The only person I could see taking on that mantle, if you were to continue down the road, if let's say someone threw loads of money at Avery to kind of go and make your whatever it would be called now, Phantasm 2099. Go and make that one. Who would you bring on? Would Clancy Brown, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, he had a great audition.
That's who Bryan and I picked.
after the Mortuary Collection.
Mortuary Collection.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But even with him being on board, you'd still be going like, it's not quite right.
Yeah.
Even though he would be brilliant, it'd be like the troops in the grove of the Tall Man. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's get back on. I'm going off on a Phantasm tangent.
That's kind of what this series is about.
Yeah, that's all we do, actually. But as far as the using this footage and we're talking about this, I think what it accomplishes. Well, first, a couple things. Peter, I think first you mentioned that you wouldn't. It wouldn't be as endeared to you without that old footage, and I completely agree with you. I think with the caveat that the footage that is not the old footage is great footage, but it's incomplete. Yeah. Just like that old footage is without this new stuff is. It's so brilliantly done. It's a conversation. It ends up becoming a conversation between the first movie and this one,
which is absolutely insane when you think about the fact that, like, when Coscarelli is doing each one of these, like, yes, he's been guiding the ship the whole time, but it's not like I've only really discovered as we've been doing this series, like, it's not that he had any kind of master plan. He was starting from zero every time he did one of these. So the fact that he is able to have that conversation with a movie from, at that point, that was 20 years earlier, is just insane to me. I didn't understand how he did it when I was 14 years old.
Yeah, no, and for people to refer to it as a clip show is just frankly insane because, as Peter said, well, you both said it. Bryan, you said it's a clip show for a movie that never was, and Peter said, well, how can it be a clip show when we've never seen this footage? Yes, and yes. It's not a clip show. It's all as a longtime Phantasm fan watching this, and I'm the one of the group, probably by age default, who was there from the first movie and watching them as they progressed. I was stunned by this the first time I saw it, and I was expecting clumsily inserted flashback footage, right? Your standard flashback footage, Wes Craven style, where a dog has a flashback. That kind of sloppiness, and instead it's so carefully woven with such care that it ends up being, even in all of its lunacy, it ends up really being the most, I think, best constructed of the Phantasm movies.
And it's something where, he very much made the right choice. Instead of trying to go big the way Phantasm's End would have gone had they had the budget, realizing what he was working with, he went internal, and that was definitely the right call in hindsight. And we're looking at this, it's really only like the amount of characters in this you could pretty much count on one hand. It's very kind of isolated set pieces. And in terms of exploring the mythology, instead of kind of, turning it into this apocalyptic, what happens when this kind of spreads all over the planet, it's more, let's kind of dig into the origins a little bit more. which, can also be a risky proposition, when you start to dig too much into the, how did this happen, or kind of almost turn it into a prequel. Other movies have tried that. And, the one that always comes to mind for me is, the more you learn about Michael Myers and Halloween, the less scary he becomes. So, but doing that here, where it's this very kind of intimate, you have Reggie who's chasing after Mike, but a big chunk of the movie, for me, the focus is on kind of delving into this relationship between Mike and the tall man, as Mike tries to figure out kind of where did the tall man come from? Like, how did this all start? And I think that Coscarelli does a really good job at exploring some of those avenues without over explaining things, and still keeping that Phantasm flair of, like, yes, you learn that he was Jebediah Morningside, but beyond that, and the fact that, like, he built this gateway that he walks through and the tall man comes out of, you really don't learn a whole lot about it. So there's still such just that veil of mystery that you don't lose any of that fear of the unknown that I think Phantasm is so great at producing.
It also feels very much like a film made by a matured filmmaker. I mean, he was mid-40s when he made it, and I know full well that when I was in my mid-40s a few years ago, that you are starting to think about life and the, as horrible as it sounds, the end of days, the end, that you've kind of lived probably at least half your life, if not more than half your life. And I kind of get that feeling from this film that he's kind of gone, I'm winding down.
Mm-hmm.
These characters are winding down, rather than we're building up. It's very much got, again, you've already mentioned it. It's got that melancholic feel to it, that it's just so, and this is it might not sound weird at all, but it's just so beautiful. It feels so beautiful that he was ballsy enough to do that. Yes, he didn't have a lot of money, so he couldn't really do the massive kind of, although he has got bloody big explosions in it and crashes. But he knew that he didn't have the budget that he had for 2 or 3. He knew that, he was kind of going back to the beginning as much as anything, with the amount of money that he had. And he probably also knew at that point, I haven't got many more films in me. If this is going straight to video, my last one went straight to video. How much longer am I going to be able to kind of make the films that I want to make? So I just feel that it's one of those ones where, it was kind of me watching it last night. And I wonder how old he was when he made this, and kind of looking it up and going, that feels right for that kind of age, which sounds weird, but it just felt, to me, it felt this was the film that he had to make, in his mid-40s.
And yeah, I think with that maturity, he's also blurring the lines with some of these relationships. Like, because something that occurred to me, Peter, when you mentioned that, this is the last time we see kind of the tall man in all his glory. And I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, he's, I think Scrim is fantastic, even in Ravager, but you can tell, yes, like, there's only so much he can do at that point in his life. But here, he's still the tall man. But I also noticed that there's something creeping into Tall Man's interactions with Mike that almost borders on affection for this kid. It's kind of one of those, like, we've been part of each other's lives so long that, like, I'm still going to kill you and everybody that you love, but I also I like what we've got going here. And there's that scene where when Mike tries to hang himself, and the tall man, tells him, that's my realm exclusively. But he reaches his hand out and says, we've got things to do. And when Mike rejects him, there's that brief moment where, you can almost see, it seems like he hurt the tall man's feelings, which is that could be such a misstep. But I think at this point in the series, it's almost like it works. And I didn't notice it until seeing it this last time.
Well, I mean, those familial dynamics are set up through the whole series, right? And again, that's why I said it's so. If you want to know what this movie is about, or this series is about, you have to start at the first one, because it's all about familial relationships and our relationship with fate. And I think Peter brought up a wonderful point. Viewing these movies at my current age of 51 versus viewing these movies at the age of 10. At 10 years old, I fear the tall man and I'm with Mike. At 51, I don't fear the tall man. But they're not telling me still in my real life what it is I'm supposed to fear. So that always hangs, like a lonely pallbearer over the entire series. The older you get, I'm not supposed to get answers about life, I don't think, through this series, but I think what it does is it's nice to have something to hang on to as you do get older that at least understands your fears.
Mm-hmm. Especially because they're the ones causing them.
Yes, but in a general existential sense too, right? Mm-hmm. You're not thinking about that at 10. Let me tell you, I've had a couple conversations with myself at 51.
And I think kind of paralleling that's injection of affection between Mike and the tall man, I think that's counterbalanced with Mike's coming to terms with his relationship with Jody. And I think in terms of the kind of what's literally going on in the story, I'm still not 100% sure what to make of Jody's arc in this one. But I think the feeling that it elicits is very interesting, especially, again, as you've mentioned, Scott, looking at this from the first one, where in part one, Jody is very much one of the leads. He's the person that Mike is kind of ride or die with. You get that crushing reveal at the end that it turns out that Jody's been dead. He comes back in 3 as kind of like this mysterious, he's one of the spheres, but he's also trying to help them. And then here, it continues that, but that facade kind of crumbles as you realize that, Jody is not to be trusted. And I think that says a lot about something about how, I was thinking while watching it, just that idea of someone you love who you've lost and how maybe you idealize them. And then you kind of have to come to the terms with the fact that maybe they weren't exactly what you remember them being. And they were just human beings and flawed. And it's something I haven't fully formulated yet, because it's just something I started picking up on in this last viewing last night. But it's just, as much as in a literal sense, it still didn't fully make sense what's going on with Jody. In true Phantasm fashion, I think the feelings that it was eliciting were so potent and poignant that I appreciated it, especially this last time I saw it.
Well, I want to drag Peter back here because he brought something up that I think is really the crucial part of the movie, of why we find it so endearing, or not so endearing, is because it seems so grounded in itself and solid and sure of what it is because it really does feel, Peter, like Coscarelli is shutting down this shop.
Mm-hmm.
It's all over the movie. It's in the tall man's dialogue. He constantly says to Mike, "It's time." Yeah. He says to Reggie, "It's almost time." Jody flat out comes and tells Mike, "I died in the car crash." Mm-hmm. I think that may be the first time we've gotten that answer. And you know what? I've missed it every single time that I've watched this until last night.
And I think
yeah,
for
and
me,
I just think,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to finish up by saying, and I think that's Peter drew on that so beautifully by, I hadn't thought of it as being Coscarelli's willful intention, but now looking at it, it really does feel that way.
And it's also one of those things too, where it's like, it's a definitive answer that doesn't make things any clearer about the series.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like, yes, if all this is him saying, yes, I died in a car accident, then what the fuck were we just watching for the last 4 movies? So it's like that's where I'm kind of getting to that thing of like, it doesn't necessarily make literal sense in terms of like plot and in the script, but yeah, it's I think you put it perfectly, Scott, and you know, kind of carrying off of what Peter was saying, it's we're shutting down and we're going to give you some answers that aren't going to fully make sense, but there's going to be something. And I think the ending of it, the ending of the movie, and this kind of goes to one of the things I've been reading as we go along to kind of prep for these. Of course, we've got Phantasm Exhumed, but the Rue Morgue authorized Phantasm Film Companion by John W. Bowen. He put together a lot of like interviews that he did with Coscarelli, previous interviews that the magazine had done with some of the various stars and crew members. But I think one of the most interesting things he says about Oblivion is that this one doesn't end so much as dissolve. And I think that's a really great way of putting it. Like, it's so dissolve, like it's not even abrupt. It just goes, you know, and that was one element that as a 14-year-old really bugged me because I did want that closure. But then I realized, you know, looking at it at 37, that is closure. You know, that's the way things sometimes end in life. You know, they don't end well and they don't end in this grand finale. They just kind of end.
Now think about me watching it in order, and endings go from boy to it's never over to no, it's not to it's the win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, you know, it was completely different. Now, I think I always love, my favorite question to ask people about the Phantasm movies, especially Oblivion. So, Peter, I'll ask you this. What is your interpretation of the series up to this point? If this is the period on the end of the sentence, can you give me the Peter Hearn description of what we've witnessed and where we are? And
just very quickly, because like I know most of the people listening to this are probably pretty much diehard Phantasm fans, but just to make sure people have the context of like what we're talking about, this movie ends with Mike tries to, he starts getting the powers of the tall man. So he rigs up his own sphere, which is kind of basically just a distraction for the tall man to get him next to the hearse that he's taking out into the desert. He activates these kind of Mike / tall man powers and blows up the hearse and the tall man with it. But then the tall man, as per usual, another tall man kind of clone comes out of the alternate dimension. Removes the silver or the golden sphere out of Mike's head, disappears back into the alternate dimension. Reggie goes to try and chase after the tall man as Mike lies dying, and that's where it cuts to kind of one last previous clip from the original, where they're riding in the ice cream truck, Reggie and Mike, and you can actually hear they superimpose some of that dialogue from what we're watching at the end of the movie, and Reggie asks, "Did you hear something?" And Mike just says, I think it was just the wind. So just to kind of like, that's what we're talking about when we say the ending kind of dissolves.
That's right. So so Peter, what happens? Tell us.
What, throughout the series or just the end?
No, where do you? Because I know you and I both feel for sure that this was like a definitive ending. So, I know we can't nutshell this with this series at all, but what do you think he was saying, if anything, with this whole thing? Okay. You know what? That's not fair of me, because I've thought about this forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you're taking the series as a whole, it just feels like the worst, and this is, it feels like the worst fever you've ever had. It feels like you're dying of flu and you're having all these vivid, weird dreams. So
do you think it means anything?
I think that each of the films means something different, but I don't know whether he's really going for... I mean, he might be. You can read anything into anything, but I think the first film was, let's make a film that's going to make people jump. What should we do? I don't know. Let's make it up as we go along. And then, and it's, we've shot all of these bits and pieces along the way, and it feels a bit like a fever dream. Let's just go with that. The second one feels like, I've got more of a budget. Let's have some really cool action sequences, especially with chainsaws and things. The third one is, we've got a bit more of a budget. I really liked Home Alone. I'm being glib. But I think when I watch it, I kind of, every now and then I try and pick up and think, what is the story that he's trying to tell? And I just get to the point where you can't follow it in that. You can't follow it in a narrative sense, because it isn't that kind of movie. It's not that kind of series. Mm-hmm. Every film seems to add or take away a layer from what you expected beforehand. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're going with this one being them kind of with Coscarelli really thinking about kind of the end of the characters, the end of possibly him kind of making these kind of movies, etc. That's then the carpet's then pulled up with Ravager, and the whole dementia kind of aspect playing with that one. Mm-hmm. The third one just seemed to be almost like let's reset after number two. Let's just go back to what we know with the original cast, and let's just put them in a new situation, and let's roll with that. I'd love to be able to kind of delve into going, oh yes, this is all about blah blah blah, but I can't, because I love each and every one of the films.
Peter, it's okay. You can't. No, I'm about to psychoanalyze them.
Go on.
No, I'm not. But this is kind of when I finished watching this movie in '98 on videotape from a different Blockbuster than you were working at, Peter. The takeaway that I had, and again, it's the kind of ending that is so quiet that just makes you contemplate, everything that went before. My big takeaway is that none of the events outside of the boy's parents dying and Jody dying, which is the catalyst for these fever dreams that Mike has. And I think what we're seeing at the end is Mike finally making peace with his struggles with accepting death and the passing of his loved ones by finally dismissing it and saying, it's just the wind, as the tall man takes what he wanted from Mike and is gone. That's kind of, and again, that's everything that I'm reading into it, formulating this. Now, Bryan may have something completely different in Peter as well, and as everyone else. And I think that's just another one of the beautiful things about the series is whatever you get out of it, you can get whatever you want out of it. It just depends on what you're putting into it.
Yeah. And it's, for me, what I love so much about this series is that, and we've said this multiple times, and I'm sure we've actually said that in the series multiple times, that part of what is so great about it is that everybody can have very definitive readings on what this movie is, and they can all be right. And that's not to say that the movie is so all over, or the series is so all over the place and doesn't really know what it is, that you could ascribe anything to it. I think there's a deliberateness to just kind of how far-reaching your understanding of this could be, and the more I watch it, and I appreciate it for being a movie about kind of a struggle against the darkness. And darkness could be a multitude of things. It could be, literally struggling against death. It could be, struggling against grief of losing loved ones. It could be, as we're going to see in Ravager, the struggle against kind of the deterioration of your own mind. There's just,
and I don't even think, and it's not even like it's a. Sorry to cut you off, Bryan. No. And I had something deliberate to say, and I completely forgot it. I'm going to step back, and you continue with what you were saying.
No. I mean, that's really what my point is. That it's just, it's all about that struggle, and I think one of the interesting things here is that you're kind of getting someone who in Mike is ready to put that struggle down. And there's certainly a sadness to it. But there's also kind of just a resignation to it. And again, that'll get upended to a certain extent with Ravager, but it's also, this is a series where whatever various retcons and things that they need to do in subsequent sequels, I don't think they ever discount or negate the things that have come before it. Like everything that is important about each one of these movies stays even as things are pivoted and twisted in subsequent movies.
Yeah. No, I remember. Sorry, I remember what I was going to say, and it's not even like it's in subtext. That wasn't the intention of this movies. I think it's I come to it with so much, not because there's something hidden in there that I'm seeing and pulling out. I really think it's because, honest to God, I've spent 40 years with these people. Literally. So and when you identify with something that strongly, culturally, it's like it's something that grows with you. So it is a matter of picking out, I'm choosing to see it as a, it is a treatise on dealing with death, because at the time when I had seen the first Phantasm, I had two grandfathers that died a month apart when I was like 10 years old. So it was obviously a movie that I had a weird affinity for. But so it's that kind of series that if you're open to it, there are things there that you can attach to. If you just like the fact that the Tall Man is one of the greatest horror icons of all time, and you just want to see him sling around some sphere death, that's cool too. It's completely up to the viewer, the Phantasm fan, how they choose to see it and how they choose to engage with it.
And that's a good segue into speaking of Phantasm fans. We put the call out to our fellow fanatics about what their thoughts were on Oblivion. Frankly, I thought we weren't going to get much of anything, and if it was going to be anything, it was going to be a bunch of people, telling us that it was ass and why are we talking about it. But we got a really good, I think, range of feedback. The first couple were less than friendly towards the movie. Michael Kocher at Maddox31_1. It's a pretty disappointing and poorly constructed.
Next. Well, we've already discussed that it isn't poorly constructed. Let's go. What else you got?
Luke Tremblay at LUCCTV. At least it's not as bad as Ravager. And I already replied to him saying, well, you're definitely going to have thoughts about our Ravager episode then.
Yes, you are.
Dr. Arnold T. Blumberg at Doctor of the Dead says, as a dedicated fan, I love the exploration of the Tall Man's origins, as well as the chance for Scrim to play a different part, however fleetingly. However, overall, it's a very weak and clearly limited film, but from a fan point of view, it's still a fun episode of an ongoing series.
That first sentence is sublime. Next.
Then we have the New World podcast at the New World Pod. To me, Phantasm IV is more of a fan film than Ravager, in that it was only made for folks who have stuck with the franchise this far. Not that Phantasm movies make sense per se, but 4 is a fever dream on top of a fever dream. If you miss 1 through 3, you aren't catching up.
Now, see, you and I, when we saw that comment, we had this discussion. I think it should be reversed. Ravager, this is a Phantasm film. Ravager is, to me, the victory lap that was made for the fans to celebrate this series with a bunch of cool stuff.
Well, and one of the things I realized, too, is that I initially misread fan film as, like, fan-made film, and I think the point that they're making is more that it's a film for the fans, and that, like, you need to be in this universe and interested in it and know what's going on as much as anybody can,
for sure,
in order for it to make sense, and that I agree with.
Oh, totally.
But I think where this is going to make for some interesting conversation for you and I, Scott, is and I'd be interested to hear your take on this, Peter. From what I'm hearing, like the series proper ends here, and Ravager is more of like a coda, or like you said, a victory lap. It's something kind of fun to bring us back into the world. But I almost get a sense, Scott, that for you, Ravager isn't part of like the main canon. Is that an accurate thing to say?
It is. It completely is. But I think the main story, as it were, if you want to call Ravager an epic epilogue, or whatever. But to me, and see, again, this comes down to personally myself. I'm more than content and happy with the story, and I think the story ends with Oblivion. And I think if you want to call this, no, I think Coda is great, but I really think what it is because of the determination of David Hartman and Coscarelli starting to do these. David Hartman doing these little shorts for the internet of new Phantasm scenes with Reggie, that people still wanted more. And so they rallied around, and it took 16 years, but, we eventually got Ravager. So I see Ravager as nothing but a celebration of the series and, of course, canon. Mm-hmm. It's all part of the Phantasm story and lore and all the characters of there. So, I mean, canon. I think you want to talk about the most floating canon in the history of horror. It's going to be, what goes inside and outside of this canon.
But it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, Scott, if even knowing Ravager exists, if you for the rest of your life could only watch 1 through 4, you might not be necessarily thrilled about it, but you wouldn't feel like there was a piece missing from the story. Like you would feel like, I got a complete story in 1 through 4.
The story that I was invested in, mm-hmm. completed at 4. Some of the best things about the entire series are in 5, like Reggie Bannister's performance mm-hmm. is brilliant in Ravager, and that really didn't get enough attention when it came out. But again, that's tangent. But is a part of Ravager part of the canon? Yes, of course it is. But I do feel, for me, the story ends at 4, and beautifully.
Peter, what are your thoughts?
To be honest, I pretty much agree with Scott. I thought Reggie Bannister was awesome in Ravager, and I wouldn't want to wipe that film from existence because of that performance as much as anything. I kind of see I see Ravager as a kind of a celebration. I'm glad we've got it. No disrespect to David Hartman, but it would be nice to have had Coscarelli direct it and make it really feel really complete part of the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
But I think there's some really, really nice moments in 5. And because it exists, the only thing I feel that 1 to 5 is the series. I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that it was made. I'm glad that that they ran around with a camcorder or whatever they filmed it on. It doesn't matter if it looks cheap in places. Doesn't matter if it looks like it was shot on video, because it was shot on video. When I watched it, I think I remember messaging you, Scott, and just saying I really enjoyed it. And And I know for a lot of fans, they didn't enjoy it. But you're never going to please everyone, are you? Let's face it. Old, half these comments are people that aren't pleased. So
we'll definitely kick the Ravager Hornet's Nest a little bit more next month.
Absolutely, can't wait.
But so the last few comments we have here will be more to Scott's liking. Next up, we have Fingers to the Temple at Hero Researcher. Says 4 ranks really high for me because it feels as close to the first film's surrealism as any of the sequels. I love the Morningside backstory because it gives us a little but not enough. Phantasm is at its best when it never fully answers your questions. Best use of old cut footage ever.
Yes.
Well, I mean, what's no notes.
Follow that up with Emily Von Sela, who joined us, as you know, for our last episode on Lord of the Dead. Find her at Horrorella blog. The haters can suck it. 4 is great. I love the way it continues to push the boundaries of reality and doesn't just give the audience what is easy. Great performances, especially from Scrim. Love the insertion of the old footage. Love the way Coscarelli took the opportunity to further muddle dream and the waking world / life and death.
Again, no notes. Love you, M. M knows the deal.
And then one more, and I'm not 100% convinced that Scott didn't just create a burner account to put this one in. This is
I don't know how to do that.
This is from J-Hex at JF Heckle. 4, and that's spelled with a PH, is second only to the original and one of the greatest sequels of all time, in my opinion. It's at once cerebrally fascinating and grotesque, touching and bombastic. It makes you question everything you think you might know about the series. It makes marvelous and truly artistic use of 20-year-old unused footage from the original. What editing, my God. And it has the return of Reg in full Ice Cream Commando regalia. I could go on and on effusing my love for this film.
Peter, I have to ask, where's the lie in any of that?
Exactly. There is no lie.
So yes, we are not the only ones with affinity for this film. And so, as I'm sure everybody has been waiting for with bated breath, wow. Okay. I'm just so excited. We are going to return to everybody's favorite segment, Morningside Musings, where we will have wildly inaccurate speculation about what the tall man is saying in these films. Now, one caveat for Oblivion. I did not I didn't include anything from the old footage, and I didn't include anything where he was Jebediah Morningside, mainly because we would tack on about an hour and a half worth of this dumbass bit if I kept all that stuff in. There's enough in here as it is, so I think we'll have plenty to chew on here. But Peter,
yes.
I'm told that you are interested in joining in some of these readings.
Oh, absolutely.
So now, because
we need someone to do a good tall man, we haven't had it yet, except for
Emily did a pretty good job.
Emily's was great.
Yeah. It was good. Yeah.
Now, because he doesn't actually have this line in the film, I'm going to have to ask you to give us a little bit of an audition, just because I want to hear you give us a good tall man boy before we get started.
What?
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, if it makes you feel any better, Peter, I'm awful at it. I'm so bad at it. So I just want to give you a chance to lean into one.
Okay. All right. Boy.
So much better than ours.
More like a bounce.
I like
that sounded more like a bouncing ball.
I like it. It had a little bit of Shakin' Stevens at the end, but that's okay.
But then I quite like Shakin' Stevens.
Well, who doesn't?
Exactly.
You've got the role, Peter, and in fact, why don't we go ahead and let you kick off with the first line reading proper.
Okay. Small man, your end approaches, but it is not yet. Take great care how you play. The final game now begins.
Scott, you got anything
I love
on that?
it.
Yeah.
I love it. First of all, I want him in a Star Wars movie right away. Working for the Empire. Oh, wait. Is it the First Order? Okay, anyway.
No.
What do I think he's saying there yet? Okay, well, and this is only for the viewers, for the deep fans. There's a scene, possibly, I think it was cut from the original, and it's in the scrap footage. But if you have the MGM videotape of Oblivion, it has there's a scene of footage from the first movie in which the tall man and Mike are playing a game of Risk, the board game. Again, for time constraint, it was a little slow. As you can imagine, it's a board game. So it was cut out, but that was put in there to kind of bring people, again, a conversation between Oblivion and the original film.
I mean, I can't think of any better interpretation than that. I think you're pretty spot on, sir.
That's what I thought.
I thought it was a bedroom scene, but maybe I'm just looking at it from the wrong
perspective.
Hey, we've already come to the conclusion that tall man, he's not above getting down and dirty to meet his own ends.
Well, exactly. There you go. Small man, he's talking about the size of, you know what? We won't go beyond that. You've lost your audience now.
Well, don't worry, Peter. We lost them at Morningside Musings.
No, he didn't. He's sitting right here.
All right. So I think I'll take the tall man for this. Who wants to? This is some dialogue, so I'll need someone to.
So I can play Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
You go ahead, do the tall man.
Yes, boy. The coach will drive itself.
Where are you taking me?
Where you belong. This experience may seem strange to you. This evolution as you prepare for passage.
I still have a friend. He'll fall and he'll find me.
Are you doing squeaky voiced teen from The Simpsons?
Just do your line, would you? Come on.
You have no one but me.
Yoinks!
I was getting a Scooby-Doo.
Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
So basically, they're passing the time on this long road trip by practicing readings from various Scooby-Doo episodes. I think that works. Those Southwest, as beautiful as the Southwest is, when you're driving that long, you start to get bored. So you got to find ways to kill time. So, Scott, I think I think you once again nailed it.
That's what I do. Okay, am I up?
Yep.
Okay. Where do you think you're? It's Clint Eastwood right away. Where do you think you're going, boy? Death is no escape from me. No. Where do you think you're? I've never, it's horrible. I have the man tattooed on my arm. This is terrible. I'll say, where do you think you're going, boy? Death is no escape from me. There, I'm going with
Foghorn
Leghorn. Screw it. I can't do it. I can't do them. I got Peter doing like professional voiceovers over here. I got you, and never mind. All right.
Thanks.
Anyway, my interpretation of this is from what I had heard. And maybe you guys can clear this up because you cannot always trust Wikipedia. But where do you think you're going, boy? Death is no escape from me was originally they had a John Denver song written for the movie. And then he died in that terrible plane crash in the mountains. So the movie was removed, and the name of the song was "Where Do You Think You're Going, Boy? Death Is No Escape From Me." Annie's song in parentheses. But again, like I said, he passed on, so they took the song out, but they left the dialogue in.
Peter, why don't you go ahead and read the next one?
Okay. I've been waiting for you for a very long time. And no, you may not take your own life. That is my domain, exclusively on Sailor Darth Vader. Come, boy, we have things to do.
And places to be.
That is from the tall man's stint as a manager at Denny's. And once again, finding one of his employees like trying to walk out into traffic, and he's like, no, you've got work to do. Get back in here.
Oh, sweep the floors.
No, I thought that was from Star Wars on Ice with Peter Hearn in the role of Darth Vader.
All right, I guess I'm up here. Careful what you look for. You just might find it.
I think that's good. I like that one.
Yeah, that was a good one.
He's warning Mike. Mike is looking through the tall man's internet search history. And just giving him a caveat as he starts doing that.
See, I thought it referred to the small man dig, but
was the small man like looking?
Again, that could just be what I'm reading, my perspective that I bring into.
To be honest, all of these lines could be from a bedroom. Let's face it.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
especially the next one.
Converting the Phantasm series into a porn parody would be a lot simpler than you would think.
Oh, you don't have to change a single thing of dialogue. No.
You know, when you were asking me earlier about what the whole series was about? Well,
yeah.
There we have it.
The boudoir. All right. I think we nailed it. And all this discussion for nothing. Scott, think you're up.
And so it begins.
This is
one range, though. I have to say,
that was good. I like it.
I was getting hints of Igor there, so I don't know. Maybe that was.
It doesn't have 4 E's instead of an I there, Scott. It says it begins. I scribbled in 4 E's in lipstick on my computer screen.
You had notes,
Begins.
You're just adding a little extra flair.
There you go.
Yeah, and so that was, that you have to start somewhere, and the tall man started as Frankenstein's assistant, and so that was just hearkening back to that. Peter.
Oh, this won't hurt a bit. Well, maybe just a little bit.
Yeah. Seriously, did they just crib this dialogue from porn movies? Like, Peter, you've ruined this entire series for me now.
Or made it better.
Yeah, a little from column A.
Just wait for the next. Go for the next line, then you're fully there.
Ice cream man. It's all in his head. We don't even need to talk about what these mean anymore because it's just across the board.
And then the last one, it's time now, boy. A toy. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to just about do it.
Everyone's scratching my name off their podcast guest list.
We apologize.
Don't have him on.
Peter, we have not.
Oh, it's not you.
Yeah, Peter, this whole portion was doomed from go. So you've not ruined anything. You've done your best to save it. So we appreciate it.
But like Mr. Coscarelli, we're full of tenacity, and if we say we're going to do something, we do it.
Absolutely.
Regardless of if it's ill-advised, we're still going to see it through.
I think Mr. Coscarelli would like this episode.
I think he would too.
I think he would.
Agreed. And so we got one last little segment we like to do where we give the Scrim Award, which is we highlight each of our favorite aspects from this particular installment. And so, Peter, you're our guest. So what element of this movie, and it can be anything, score, performances, if there was a particular shrub that you liked in the background that you want to highlight,
shrubs?
Not Shrub 2, that's mine.
What would you like to give the Scrim Award to?
Well, I'd like to give the Scrim Award to 2 bits, but I'm going to have to just pick one, and I don't know which one to go for.
No, we have plenty. We have plenty. We don't mail out the real one until weeks later, so...
Okay, so one is the sequence in Wilshire Boulevard. Is it Wilshire Boulevard? I think so.
Somewhere in LA where it's abandoned, right? Yeah,
somewhere in LA. Hearing that they did the whole Ed Wood and kind of quickly ran there and shot it without permits and all of that. I love that aspect of it, but I just think that whole sequence is beautifully realized, and really wonderfully played by your 2 actors in there. The other is the final line. So the when they're driving on their ice cream truck, and it's just the wind.
So good.
Just the wind. So there you go. That's what I would give it to. I can't really. Yeah.
No,
that was
great picks.
That's what I would give it to. Yeah.
How about you, Scott?
I cannot, of course, disagree with any of those things. But, as we've been discussing, this was really the last movie that our blessed Angus Scrimm was in full power as the tall man. So I think I've done this. Well, I think at least 2 of the 3 episodes, I've given the Scrim Award to Angus Scrimm once again. But I think this is, again, it puts a grace note on his career as this character. I think in a beautiful way. He keeps going forever through more portals to ruin more lives, to have everyone question their own mortality. He's walking through the portals, and he always will. So my Scrim Award, no surprise, Angus Scrimm once again.
Fantastic. And for as much as I love Don Coscarelli, the director, this time around, I have to give the award to Don Coscarelli, the screenwriter, because finding out that he built his entire screenplay from the seed of using unused footage from the original Phantasm, and the fact that he made something so poignant and coherent is a relative term when it comes to the Phantasm series, but something that is structured so well and comes together so well, I think is such an achievement. And the fact that, I've been able to appreciate it so much more as I've gotten older, is just really, I think, a testament to the writing that Coscarelli did for this movie. So yeah, I'm going to give it to the screenwriter, Don Coscarelli. And that brings us to the end of the installment. Check back next month. We will be diving into the final entry of the series with Phantasm Ravager. But before we go, Peter, where can people find you and your work?
I'm on Twitter at Hearnesque. My Scrawl's available on DVD and on VOD and on Amazon Prime, I believe. The shorts that I've been involved in are all kind of playing festivals still. And we're planning to shoot a new feature next April, which will be fun.
Very nice.
Ooh.
Awesome. Good stuff.
And watch Scrawl, everyone. Watch Scrawl. It's got that good Phantasm indie spirit in it.
So thank you so much for joining us, Peter. We had a great time. Hope you enjoyed yourself as well.
Thank you. I did, yes.
And of course, as always, we want to thank Bryan, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank you, our listeners, including those of you who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Be sure to visit corpseclub.com, check out our latest episode. You can also become a Corpse Club member, which will give you access to some of our bonus content. We've got all kinds of fun commentaries and side episodes, things like that. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Each and every rating and review helps. You can also find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, and all of your favorite podcast providers. If you want to get in touch, you can reach us anytime at contact@corpseclub.com or on Twitter at Daily Dead News or at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, stay scary.